This is Voices from the Edge.
And joining us today is the wonderful Michelle Stephenson. Michelle, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Come a long way, a long way. How long did it take you roughly to get here?
Just under 50 minutes, so yeah, decent journey.
How are you liking the cold? Are you a cold weather person or are you a summer person?
I think I'm a summer person, but ask me when it's summer and I'll tell you I'm looking forward to the cooler weather, I'm sure.
All right. Now, Michelle, you're an organisational psychologist.
Mm-hmm.
What does that do?
Okay, what does that do? What do we do?
Yeah.
I think it can mean a lot of things, depending on where you go. But what I like to say is probably it's the understanding of people at work in a lot of different contexts.
Okay.
You probably know more clinical or traditional psychology. I think that's what we're often known for or associated with. That tends to be focused on more of an individual mental health kind of lens. I like to think that organisational psychologists are looking at the health of an organisation and then considering how do we diagnose and treat the organisation.
When you say organisation of a health of an organisation, what does that actually entail? Because that's to me that could mean almost anything. Where do you start with that?
Well, often you would start with some form of diagnosis and sort of needs assessment. I think organisational psychologists are well placed to look at, well, what is contributing to a presenting issue at the time, but then also have maybe a foundational knowledge in a lot of different disciplines, work health and safety, HR, change, culture, work design, a range of things to consider, well, what is going to be the best approach for that particular organisation or that particular issue going forward.
Do you often come across what you might call dysfunctional organisations?
Ooh. Look, I think since the introduction of the legislation around psychosocial hazards or psychosocial risk management, it's highlighting that there are probably elements of every organisation that may be considered dysfunctional, and there's always opportunity to improve. So I would say yes, but then my work is only going to probably come across those organisations where there are issues anyway. So I may have a biased perspective there too.
Okay. So I'm assuming, therefore, that organisations traditionally come to organisational psychologists only after there's been a problem. Is there any organisations that have done it as a proactive measure?
I mean, that's definitely where we want to go, absolutely, and being a lot more preventative. So where we know there is evidence for particular initiatives or ways of working, then we want to embed that before there is an issue, absolutely. I think there's always motivation, however, when something does go wrong, that is when we are going to benefit, and perhaps our expertise suggests that's going to be more of a, efficient or more effective approach.
Yeah. Okay. You mentioned the legislation changing and the introduction in the regulations, was it 55, 8 or whatever? About
A to E.
A to E, yeah. Which has added some clarity. It's certainly added some clarity for businesses about responsibilities. But
that's probably a unique perspective, I would say, Tom.
Do you think it's added more confusion?
I think there's a lot of organisations that are confused right now.
True.
So clarity in terms of we need to look at it.
Yes.
Then can of worms in terms of what does that mean?
Yes. I meant insofar as clarity in we have a responsibility to at least look at it.
Absolutely, yeah.
But it's always been there, hasn't it? It's always been, mental health has always been in the act as treatment of health and safety risks. It's just, to me, all that's done is added clarity that this is what we also need to look at. So is that kind of correct?
Yeah. It's drawn attention to it because, as you said, yes, it has always been implied.
Okay.
Yeah.
You talked about confusion. Okay. And yeah, you're absolutely right. Everywhere I go, I see confusion. What's our responsibilities? How are we going to manage this, etc.? What would add some level of clarity to businesses about what psychosocial hazards are and how to effectively manage them? Is that like winning lotto?
I think so. I think we're getting somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
I think where a lot of the confusion is coming from is there are a lot of different disciplines that need to come to and work together.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, I think there's a lot of confusion is in where does it sit, who owns it, if it's only one area of a business that's looking at psychosocial hazards and risk management, then do they have the full picture?
Mm-hmm.
Or do we misinterpret and go in a direction of, okay, well, we need to manage, I don't know, individual mental health is one direction I think some organisations are going, or are we only focusing on inappropriate behaviours
Mm-hmm.
in the workplace as another? It's tricky. We also, I think, need to find clarity and are working on it around how do we apply sort of a risk management approach when we need to consider frequency, duration of exposure, severity, as well as likelihood and consequence. We can't just apply our physical kind of risk models to this. So where do we start? Where do we go? And as we know more, I think we go, okay, there's more that we actually don't know.
Yeah. When the amendments to the regulations came out, I looked at the hierarchy of control measures and I went, I don't think any of that in its current format is actually appropriate. I mean, what do you do with substitution? What do you do? Do you isolate people who have problematic behaviours? Do we just eliminate them? I thought right from the get-go there was some problems here in terms of actually getting, no offence, regular safety folk to actually think about managing some of these things. In your opinion, you talked about where in an organisation it sits. I know you're going to say it depends on the organisation, but I'm going to ask you anyhow, where should it sit in an organisation? Should managing psychosocial hazards fit within safety, human resources? Whereabouts exactly do you think it should fit?
I wonder if that place has been created
Mm-hmm.
yet. Legislatively, work health and safety need to be over it.
Mm-hmm.
However, when it comes to the either hazard identification or risk assessment or even putting controls in place, a lot of that information and expertise will sit with HR people teams.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder if the department or the team in the future that will look after psychosocial health and safety, whether or not that has actually been created in more traditional organisations yet.
Yeah.
But I think what it has highlighted is that it needs to be a collaborative approach.
Yep. And I hear everyone in business says, well, then who's going to be responsible for it?
Mm-hmm.
Because we all look for simple solutions and go, you're responsible for it, or you're responsible. I can see we're going to be literally passing the buck and passing the ball around a fair bit before someone actually takes ownership of it in an organisation. Do you feel that most traditional safety advocates within an organisation have the skills and knowledge to effectively manage psychosocial hazards in the workplace?
Well, I think, as your article recently indicated, perhaps not. And to have that expectation is, I would say, unfair of a lot of traditional health and safety professionals. I think the remit or expectation for that role in an organisation doesn't quite fit within psychosocial or for psychosocial risk management yet. And as you said, a lot of training perhaps is trying in that space, but isn't quite there yet either to adequately upskill and allow for that capability.
Yeah,
within our professionals.
Well, thanks for referring to an article I wrote. It's nice. It's nice to know that someone reads that rubbish that I put out. But
well, it generated, I think, quite a lot of positive discussion.
Some good discussion from some people who are well versed in the field, and that's what it was aimed at. It was aimed at actually getting some discussion, because I don't know. I look at the training that we provide, or RTOs provide, and it is scant to none about psychological safety or psychosocial hazards. And I would suggest it's partly because training organisations and those who design them have little idea about that anyhow, which to me opens the door for learned people to actually come in and help design learning programs which are actually valid for safety professionals. It would be a nice add-on if we could have something with as much prestige and respect as something like an ICAM or a Taproot or something similar, but to do with psychosocial hazards that was held in esteem, so that when you look for safety advisors' job roles, you could see that that's one of the desirable things that they want. Is there any chance we're likely to see something like that in the future?
I think so. I think there are still certain things to nut out. I think there is consideration as well. Not only are we looking at psychosocial hazards and risk factors in an organisation, but we also don't want to add psychosocial hazards in going about psychosocial risk management as well. So whether or not that be clarity or additional work demands. So when you're talking about ICAMs, I wonder, how do we use our ICAM approach and then add a psychosocial lens? Or how do we use existing practices and add that lens on top, rather than in addition, add on. Yes. Good.
All right. Now, you mentioned earlier, about some organisations are focusing on the mental health of individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen some reports that some organisations feel like the approach is best to find more suitable candidates to work in a workforce, maybe those who are a bit more resilient to certain stresses. Is that something you've seen?
Yes. And there is space for that conversation. If we talk about different types of controls, a control would be making sure people are fit for the role that they're placed in. I think quite often organisations are saying, look at us, we're nice and shiny, and these are all the benefits you're going to get. But are we actually having the realistic conversations about, this is what the role will entail? Are you clear on what the working environment will be? Have you considered whether or not you will fit with us equally? Are we doing, do we have a robust recruitment process? So there is space for that. In terms of looking at resilient individuals, there will be certain work types where that will be an important consideration, particularly those that are moving toward potentially traumatic events, for example.
Yes.
However, it wouldn't be an approach across the board. necessarily, because it won't be necessary for every single job.
Yeah. All right. Is that more tampering around the edges, or is it, or should, I'm just going to ask, would you encourage more to look at the psychosocial hazards that are in the workplace and address them rather than, I don't know, employing more resilient individuals, or is it a bit of both?
Well, that's the other consideration, right? A workplace shouldn't be contributing to the development or worsening of anyone's mental health challenge. Absolutely.
I was hoping you'd say that, to be honest.
Thank you for prompting.
Because to me, it's just, we're not going to change the environment. We'll just get better people. And I don't know if I don't know where these better people are coming from, but maybe they do exist. All right. Now, I know through your work, you do a lot of work with FIFO organisations and large organisations like that. But I'm going to ask you about something slightly different, a different sort of industry. Is it at all possible to provide a work environment free of psychosocial hazards in industries such as for prison workers, for example, or for police, or for fireys, any emergency service responses? Is that just pie in the sky that we're thinking we can have a workplace that's free of these stresses?
Well, yes, given the nature of the work, absolutely. So when we talk about psychosocial hazards, we not only talk about the way work is designed, but it's also the physical work environment has a psychosocial component to it, and just there will be jobs and roles out there that just as a result of the work that they do are going to be moving toward potential psychosocial hazards and risk factors. Absolutely. In fact, and this is the difficulty, sometimes a psychosocial hazard or risk factor could actually be something that is attractive to a person. For example, really high cognitive demands. So where you have to, you challenge, you have to use your brain a lot of the time, is what will attract certain people to certain roles. For example, I don't know, an engineering group. We don't necessarily want to remove all from the work environment.
Is there good stress and bad stress?
Absolutely, yeah. I think we all need a certain level of stress to just be motivated and be productive. Absolutely.
Good. How do we go about better supporting people in frontline, like emergency response situations where they may see things, they may be exposed to physical violence, abuse, all sorts of things, that they may see things that, as I said, traumatic events, and they may pick up vicarious trauma from even interviewing people who have been involved in those situations. What sort of support can we and should we offer these people?
Well, as you mentioned before, sort of applying the hierarchy of controls to a certain degree, there will be a physical component to that work. So it will be looking at the physical environment and specific controls there. In terms of when you talk about vicarious trauma, I think there's a few things that I'm seeing. Vicarious trauma is not usually just as a result of a one-off. It's that cumulative kind of compounding effect. So we can consider work design in rotation. Does everyone need to be exposed to every single story or experience, even if we're hearing about an incident or event? The level of support that is provided, particularly across emergency services, I would say can be very varied when maybe a significant event occurs or requires a very lengthy response. training, awareness, regular kind of reflective practice as well, which doesn't typically, isn't typically embedded in those sorts of organisations or types of roles.
Yep. Yeah, good. Just a personal opinion, do you think that people that deal with customers, clients, frontline service roles, not so much responders, but frontline service roles, are increasingly exposed to psychosocial hazards through things like abuse and angry customers and clients like that?
Absolutely, yeah, and I think that the workers' compensation data, at the very least, it reinforces that. So it's not just our frontline responders, but it's also just any kind of public-facing role.
Yep.
Definitely.
I'll tell you a story. When I first moved to Brisbane, I needed a job, and so I saw a job online and went, okay, I'll do that. And it was debt collecting over the phone, and they ran us through what we'd have to do, ringing up people that couldn't afford to pay their debts back for whatever reason. And I lasted a day before I decided ringing up people every day, multiple times a day, and getting abused was probably something beyond my level of tolerance. Do you think we all have tolerances to certain stresses, and how do we go about recognising when we've actually maybe reached them?
Okay, well, yes, I think we will all have a tolerance, and that will be based on perhaps previous experiences and but also compounded as well. It sounds like that type of work, whilst you might be potentially in a call center type environment, is quite isolated work. It's just you and the person at the end of the phone. So that might compound the experience. Yep. Or the person next to you seems to be dealing with it okay. So, is it just me? I feel very alone in that experience. How much support or access do I have to a leader? So let alone maybe our personal experiences, if we think about that work environment, there are probably a lot of factors that will increase or decrease our tolerance to exposure to that type of treatment by people at the end of the phone.
Good. All right. You're the president of, and I had to look this up to get it correct, the Society of Industrial and Organisational Psychologists in Australia. Okay. What does the society actually do?
Okay. We are a representative body for organisational psychologists in Australia, but also sort of associated in other relevant disciplines. Mm-hmm. So our main activities tend to be to advocate for the profession, either to organisations about the benefit of organisational psychologists, mm-hmm. or perhaps to our regulatory body or the government in terms of funding and anything related to organisational psychology. We also provide a lot of professional development opportunities and the ability to come together as a network.
Okay. Approximately how many organisational psychologists are there in Australia?
I don't think anyone knows that number 100%. There's
no register?
No, wow. No. There is, but it's hard to get that data. So I think it's estimated about 730 across Australia.
Okay. Since the change in the regulations, it seems from the outside that every man and his dog, including regulators, are desperately seeking industrial and organisational psychologists.
Yes.
Okay. Does this make that hard for, organisations who are looking to recruit themselves, like FIFO Focus, like PerMentis, who are actually looking for does that actually put pressure on you to find quality candidates? Because there is competition out there now, I'd suggest fairly fierce competition for organisational psychologists. Is that the case?
It definitely is the case. I mean, that's good news for
Oh, absolutely.
us as a profession. But I have seen, from finishing my degree to now, it was take whatever role you can get, to, I think, a greater appreciation for what organisational psychology or psychologists can do. That being said, not so great for organisations. What we have seen, though, from the regulator perspective is they're encouraging subject matter expertise. So whilst organisational psychologists can do that, they also note other subject matter experts such as organisational development consultants, even HR practitioners. There's a range of professionals that I think need to feed into this space.
Okay. Is it likely we could see, at least in the future, organisational psychologists embedded within larger organisations?
I think it is the goal of, or the vision of SIOPA and other bodies that support and advocate for organisational psychologists for that to be the case. Absolutely. And potentially that might be how we see psychosocial risk management taking place in organisations in the future. That being said, not every organisation can afford or is designed to have an organisational psychologist in place. So I think what I am seeing is the expertise organisational psychologists can provide is also in looking at, well, what competencies do we need? So you mentioned work health and safety professionals maybe not having all the understanding or the skill set to adequately provide this service. We're also acknowledging that HR practitioners don't have all the work health and safety knowledge or expertise in risk management. So organisational psychologists may actually be able to help build capability or capacity across the board. Good.
Having said that,
Go on.
you mentioned about some organisations may not have the resources. I'm thinking particularly in here of small to medium businesses where there is no capacity in their budgets, their organisational framework for that to be the case. Do you think, like I'm going to suggest most safety legislation, that it is more difficult for small and medium businesses to meet their legal obligations insofar as psychosocial safety in the workplace or management of psychosocial hazards in the workplace than it is for larger organisations that can get people in with expertise and can afford to pay them to give them that help?
It definitely presents as a barrier. Having interacted with a number of representatives from large and small organisations recently, I think the smaller organisations have other benefits associated. They often have touch points with all of their people, or it's a lot easier to consult with a representative group that a large organisation would be facing. So I would say perhaps there are different barriers. A big one being resource, absolutely. But again, we're early days, I would say, in understanding what we need to do in this space. So over time, I think when there is a clearer understanding, there will just be different challenges.
Yeah. I'm not a big fan of increasing taxes and increasing taxes to pay for things. But is this a situation where, at least for maybe the next 5 or 10 years, perhaps we could actually subsidise education for people in their obligations and, first of all, to manage psychosocial hazards and risks, but also give them strategies to do that?
Yes, and I think we're seeing that in WA. We've seen that perhaps with the Mars program, and obviously that has been primarily in the mining sector, but where there is benefit and learning that spans wider than that, we're seeing that offering and that benefit. I think there's probably a desire at a time for mining organisations maybe to invest in those, the broadening of that program as well over time. But we've also seen in New South Wales significant funding, I think over the next 5 to 10 years, that will help organisations with resources and understanding to meet their obligations as well.
Good. Okay, I'm going to maybe ask something a little bit difficult.
Okay, here we go.
Okay. In the last few years, obviously, we've seen a considerable increase in psychological harm or damage to people's mental health in workers' compensation claims.
Mm-hmm.
And the average claim, I think, in 2023 for a mental health injury picked up at work, for lack of better language, that's what I'm trying to get at, was around $64,500, if I'm correct. Mm-hmm. Whereas for physical work injury claims, I think the figure averaged out at about $14,500.
Yeah.
Now, this has put some strain on, obviously, workers' compensation providers. And we've seen things like in Victoria where they've limited the amount of money that you can claim for mental health injuries picked up at work. And New South Wales almost went down that path. What is the likelihood that we're going to see legislation brought in, well, at least in your opinion, across the board that is going to limit the types of claims that can be made for psychological harm causing an injury?
I think that has been proposed in certain jurisdictions. I don't think it has got over the line yet, but I think we are seeing that occur. And perhaps that comes with, as we know more, we can set clearer criteria as to what would meet a claim. I mean, 10 years ago, we didn't have a definition at all.
Yeah.
So we're learning over time. We're also seeing other avenues other than workers' compensation where you can potentially get compensation or ensure that the workplace improves or addresses and make sure it's a safer place to be.
Yeah. No, the only reason, I mean, I'm not one who would suggest we put caps on it. I'm not suggesting any workers' compensation body is putting caps on it because they don't think it's real or anything like that. Mm-hmm. But it's a financial necessity. Without actually increasing workers' compensation amounts for businesses significantly, they're on the point of perhaps not being financially viable if the growth in claims continues. Mm-hmm. So I like your idea about the ongoing perhaps ideas of what will be considered a valid claim or considered a psychological claim. Can I ask a question? Again, I'm asking just your personal opinion. Why is it so expensive to treat psychological injuries?
Well, we talk about this a lot because we're always looking particularly at work, but also with different stakeholders in organisations we're consulting with. I think compared to physical related claims, for example, if someone broke their leg, you don't see out your roster, for example, or you don't see out the week, or you don't go, okay, I'll get that checked next time I'm at the doctor. There's an immediate response that occurs with that. And also these days, sort of a standard approach to how you would repair a broken leg takes a certain amount of time for the majority of people. When it comes to mental health related claims, it is more of a nuanced sort of approach, or there are a lot of factors, whether or not that person recognises that they've experienced harm. And when we're talking harm, it's not just a little bit of distress, right? If it's a mental health related claim, it's got to a point where perhaps I can't be at work anymore, or I need considerable adjustments to allow me to show up in that same space. So if it's had to get to that point, it probably means there needs to be more time and resources invested to allow for recovery as well, and probably a long time before help was sought in the first place. Obviously not all cases, but that might be contributing factors as to why increased cost.
From your experience, do many people who get a workers' compensation claim for psychological harm or psychological injury in the workplace end up successfully going back to the same workplace?
Some can, but I think statistically, particularly when we see people off work longer and longer, it's a lot harder to return. And particularly if the work-related claims, if the work environment has contributed, if the organisation has not improved that work environment, then we're just throwing someone back into that same, I guess, dirty bathwater, for example, and expecting them to thrive second time round.
I saw some figures, and it was figures along the lines of, I think, if a worker has 70 or more days off work because of a claim, the chances of them ever returning to a workplace role was something like 35%. And that's alarming to me straight away, because they're never going back. But what was more alarming is when you compare that to the average length of time for a psychological workers' compensation claim in 2023 was 16 weeks. 16 weeks, that's a bit more over 70 days. So I'm guessing we've still got quite a few issues here to try and get people back in a functional capacity, at least in some workplace. I don't know how real it is if the organisation has played a significant part in causing that harm to get that person back to the workplace. I'm guessing it could happen, but as I said, I'd go with your statistics and say it's highly unlikely. All right. You've done some work for not-for-profit. Talk to me about that. What were you doing?
I have worked in community services. It was a slightly different role that I played. I was the manager of about 100 volunteers providing emotional support and suicide intervention to members of the public that wanted to call that service. So that was a significant role. And again, where I saw organisational psychology benefit was in a robust recruitment and selection process for the types of volunteers that would suit that organisation, and also be retained over time, because that's important for a service like that. In appropriate training and development, because as we identified before, there are certain roles where people move toward potentially traumatic exposures, whether or not that be over the phone or directly engaging with the public. So it was appropriate supervision, reflective practice, ongoing training and development, so they felt as though they were, looked after and had support in providing such a critical service to our community. The other part I played was consulting to other community service organisations, particularly around trauma-informed practice, which is a term that has been used by our regulators in a number of spaces now, ensuring that the services that were provided to the community were trauma-informed, but also that workers working in a space where they're hearing about a lot of trauma experiences were adequately supported as well.
Good. All right. Getting your crystal ball out and looking into the future now. 5 years' time. How is Australia doing managing psychosocial hazards in the workplace? What's the hope, and then what's the reality?
Okay. The hope is that most organisations and perhaps most individuals within those organisations have the language to be able to talk and understand what psychosocial hazards are, and that perhaps by then there has been greater clarity around the difference between psychological safety and psychosocial health and safety, that it is a bigger issue than inappropriate and unreasonable behaviours as well. Trying to be realistic with my aspirations, recognising that, when we compare it to physical safety, for example, that took a long time to get on board as well.
Still an ongoing process.
Still ongoing, right? So realistic kind of aspirations there. I think greater clarity, awareness and empowering individuals and organisations in that space. I think also our regulators will know a bit more about what they're looking for too. So aspirationally, perhaps increased collaboration, coaching, working together to establish what good looks like. Because we've got it on paper, what we need to do.
Yeah.
I don't think we've seen a lot of examples of what good looks like yet.
Good. No, I think that's brilliant. All right. Finally, the last thing, in your experience, what's the most common mistake organisations, or what's the most common misdiagnosed psychosocial risk in the workplace?
Oh, gosh.
Come on, you've seen a few. Just what do you think is the one that people misunderstand the most?
Misunderstanding. I could go in lots of directions for this. I think there is a lot of misunderstanding between the relationship of how a lot of psychosocial risk factors can contribute to inappropriate behaviour. So I'm sorry, I'm going to change my interpretation of your question, but I think traditionally a lot of organisations have said, or the approach has been, oh, well, that's a bad egg. They've perpetrated certain behaviour. We need to exit them. Job done. But what research, I would say, well, here in WA, we've got the benefit of the Future of Work Institute and the ECU Mars Centre now. They're finding a lot of contributing factors or links. So, for example, when there is a lot of I think there's evidence that if there is a lack of role clarity, if someone experiences role ambiguity, it can predict them to be then a bully 3 years later. So it's no longer we've just got bad eggs. I mean, that exists as well, but our organisation, the way its work is designed, can contribute to that poor behaviour hence there's a greater motivation for organisations to get on top of that.
Yeah.
So I think the links are the biggest.
I like that. So you're really saying the environment can contribute. We should look more at perhaps look a little deeper at the environment that allows certain behaviours not only to be present but to flourish, rather than just the behaviours. The behaviours are a symptom, perhaps, of the environment.
Yeah.
Good. Excellent. I'm terribly sorry I gave you some hard questions today. All right.
It's choosing one response.
Yes, that's all right. Michelle Stephenson, it's been a great honour and a great pleasure actually speaking to someone who is as wise as you in such a young person, so well done. But for now, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Voices from the Edge. If you like what we are doing, like the episode and the podcast, subscribe so you won't miss any future episodes and leave a positive review.